Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Saturday Spotlight. I am so excited for you to meet our author this week. This week we have Cendrine Marrouat, and she does everything: fiction, nonfiction, essays, short stories, poetry, photography. She is an all-in-one, and I can't wait for you to meet her. Cendrine, how are you today?
I'm very good, and I'm very excited to be with you. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's all my pleasure. So I would love to know personally, how did you embark on this path? You have such beautiful work, whether it's your workbooks, your journals, your photography, your writing. How did you kind of figure out to mold all of your skills that you have into what you're currently doing?
That's a great question, and it's hard to answer. It's hard to answer. I just started writing really randomly in 2005. I felt like writing poetry, so I started writing poetry. I used to hate poetry because I studied it at university. As poetry is badly taught at university, so I hated it. But I started writing it, and I realized, oh my goodness, I actually enjoy this. So it started in 2005. I started writing and writing and writing, and then people said, "Wow, your poetry is great. Why don't you, make books?" And that's how it got started. Then during that time, I decided to write a play because I wanted to challenge myself. That play was then published into a book, turned into a book much later in the late 2010s. But I've always had this thing that, required that challenge myself. I wanted to challenge myself very, very early on. So the first challenge, of course, was to write in English. French is my mother tongue, so that was the first challenge. I started writing in French, and then I switched to English because I love the language so much. So part of my mission to challenge myself was to try and find art forms that would basically fit my style, which is reading between the lines. My storytelling technique is letting the reader, figure out meaning between the lines. So I got the photography bug in 2010. I started my professional career as a photographer 4 years later after a lot of practice. And during that time, I realized that writing poetry and taking photographs had basically followed basically the same process in my mind. So I started using photography and poetry together. That's how I got started with multimedia releases. And then a few years later, I realized that I had a few short stories that I had written years before, but I thought I wasn't good enough at the time because I cannot write descriptions. And I suck at descriptions. It has nothing to do with the fact that English is not my mother tongue. It has to do with my style. I cannot write descriptions. And then I showed my short stories, which were just first drafts, to a friend who was also a writer. And he said, "My goodness, you can write short stories too." And I'm like, hold on, I can do that too. And as a fierce fan of haiku, I realized that I wrote like a haikuist. Minimalism, twists, um, letting readers find the clues and read the stories between the lines. And that's really what the haiku is all about: impactful, short, minimal. And then I realized, oh my goodness, I can actually write fiction too. Novels I can't because I do not have the patience to sit still and work on something for years. But short stories, I love short stories. I love writing short stories. So I've also written short stories. But what I really find exciting is the ability I have to mix, you know, visual visual components with written components. So if I release a book, a written book, it's fantastic. But I much prefer working on multimedia projects. And that's what I've been doing for quite a while now.
That's awesome. I think it's so cool because I think it's so rarely done, but when it is done, I find it quite masterful.
Yes.
I know it's a different spin than what you normally have, but there's a series of books called Miss Pellegrin's Home for Peculiar Children, and fiction, very much fiction, but it kind of has these old-timey feel photos inserted into the dialogue to show the photos, right, of these peculiar children. And I think it enhances the experience so much, and it makes it so much more relatable and honestly just kind of cooler, in my opinion. So I love that you're doing that too. I know it's a more realistic take than Miss Pellegrin's, which is pretty, out there. But I don't know. I love it. I think it gives the reader an ambiance and an environment that you can't create through description, even if you are a prolific description writer, right? Because if you're writing about a green shade tree, well, that might look different to me than it would even to you, right? Because if we're from different parts of the same country, of different countries, what I think of as my baseline go-to tree is going to look different. Whereas if you have a picture of this beautiful, weeping willow with, grass and the sun and the clouds, and you're taken there. There's nothing left to confuse readers from different backgrounds, and I think that that's really cool because then you get to play with both. You get to choose what grounds the reader, and then you get to choose what the reader gets to make up. And so, it's very playful to me.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And so you also mentioned that you're a lover of haikus, and from knowing your work a little bit, I feel like that's an understatement, even though it's a strong statement, because you've done different apps and programs and stuff based on various styles of haikus, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I created poetry forms based on the haiku, and I even created a form of flash fiction that, celebrates my love of photography, but also, I love how good haiku, hit you in the field, as we say. So for me, the haiku when beginners come to me with advice on how to write impactfully, I tell them, learn to write haiku and or learn how to write a play. Because what is a good play really? It's about, the author, the playwright will leave clues here and there during the play. And the viewer, the reader, is supposed to pick up the clues and then, figure out what's going on until you reach the climax. And finally you realize, oh yeah, that's exactly what was going on. Now I understand with those clues. But a good play and a good haiku doesn't give you the answer. It suggests. With a haiku, you freeze a moment in time. The poet shares their emotion at the time, but it's up to the reader to figure out what really the haiku means beyond that emotional moment in time that is frozen. The description. That's why a traditional haiku, has like the masters, the haiku masters really choose their words very carefully. And many people focus on the number of syllables, which is silly because the 5-7-5 syllable pattern is really an attempt at copying what is done in Japanese, which is a very, very different thing. In Japanese, it's onji. It's a different type of syllables, basically. It's not the same type of syllables as we imagine in English. So it's a very different experience. I don't speak Japanese, so I can only rely on the translations. But even when you read translations from traditional haiku, You see the translator pays careful attention to the words, and that's why each translator will give their own flavor through their translation as well, which is what it is interesting. Uh, that's why I love haiku so much and theater so much, because it's all about allowing the reader, the viewer, to figure out the meaning. And really, a good play, a good haiku, is something that you need to read several times. And then when the meaning of that piece hits you, you're like, whoa, that's what it means. Whoa. So, and it doesn't mean that's what the writer meant initially, but it's based on your surroundings, your own emotions, the way you've been raised, your settings. You're also going to add your own layer of emotions as well. So that's why I found the haiku such a magical form of poetry. And that's really what I wanted to do with the poetry forms I created in the flash coup as well, which is the type of flash fiction. Because brief doesn't mean bad. Some people equate brief and short with, lack of quality. But if you have a writer in front of you, like a book written by someone who masters the art of minimalism, um, the way you read, you're going to learn so much. You're going to have such fun. So, yeah, long spiel. I'm done.
No, you're great. I think that I'm right there with you on so many things that you said. I really love that you brought up the emotional part to poetry, because I know this has been my experience, but I'm interested to see if this has been your experience as well. You can read something, in one emotional state, and it'll mean something to you one way, right? Because you have those concise, chosen words. It's very chosen, right? Like it's specific. But then maybe you wait 5 years, you wait 10 years, you come back to something and you're like, oh, like I'm just going to, enjoy some poetry time and I know that I love this book, so I'm going to grab my favorite off the shelf. And then as different life events have happened and different emotions have developed, if you're in a different place, it can still be just as impactful but mean something totally different to you at 40 than it did at 20.
Absolutely. I agree. And when I talk about this with anyone, I always think of Emily Dickinson, who is one of my favorite poets of all time. An interesting thing, the other day, when I write, I always read, before I start writing, I always read a poem by Emily Dickinson or something from Khalil Gibran. They are my favorite inspirations. And the other day I was reading a poem from Emily Dickinson that I totally overlooked a few years ago. And then I opened the book I have, a random page, and I came across this poem, and I'm reading this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I completely overlooked that poem a few years ago, and it is so beautiful. I had shivers, and I read the poem like 10 times. I'm like, oh my God, now I get it. I do not always understand Emily Dickinson because some of the stuff she writes is kind
It
of
can be tough. Yeah.
what I love about poetry, because even though it can be obscure, there's an energy behind the words that is, to me, magical. So even if I cannot say, oh, this is what the poem means, I can still experience something magical. So that poem is a perfect example of what you were talking about, because my experience reading it was so different from what I experienced a few years ago.
How beautiful is that, right? That we're able to get those moments in life. I think that's just so special and just kind of one of the wonders of being able to read and experience other people's writing, and I love it. I love it.
I don't get it when people tell me they don't like to read. Like, you're missing on so much if you don't like to read. Like,
Yeah. I think a lot of times people just haven't found the right book when that's it.
yeah,
It's totally okay to not like what you've currently read, but you haven't found what clicks for you.
yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
I love it. So for people who are already hooked on your work, your personality, everything so far, what do you have upcoming that they might want to follow or look into with you?
Okay, I don't have anything upcoming per se, but I've just released a few, like two books and an exhibit. I've launched an exhibit as well. So I've released two books. I'll show you on the screen the covers. Um, so starting with the latest one, The Homes We Seek, which is a collection of short stories. So the title, you'll understand the main theme based on the title of this book, which actually inspired the exhibit I'll talk about in a few moments. And then you have this one, The Meaning, which is a collection of essays, poetic thoughts, short poems, thoughts in general, paired with my photography. So this is a more personal project, which started. The basic idea of that project was, how can I write about the importance of forgiveness? Because that's how it got started. How can I, you know, write about forgiveness in a way that speaks to as many people as possible? And then I realized that, just about forgiveness, you can do one poem, two poems, three poems, and one essay, two essays. But at the end of the day, you need more. So basically, this book has several main themes, but it's an invitation to look at the things around you and really say, my life is worth it. Even if things are hard, which they are for most of us, and sometimes more than others could think, it's gonna be okay at the end. It's okay. You just have to learn to be willing to learn the lessons from life, as painful as they can be. So one of the themes in the book is, I talk about my mom's suicide. One of the things I do, I talk about the fact that I cared for my grandmother in the last few months of her life because she wanted to die. So I talk about some very heavy topics. It's a personal project, of course, but at the same time, I know that it can help some people who might have been in my situation or still in my situation and are looking maybe for an alternative to what we can find in other books. That's basically, it doesn't provide a solution for anyone. It just provides thoughts and my my lessons, the lessons I learned from my experience, which I wanted to share with the rest of the world. That's basically what it is. And this, The Homes We Seek, the booklet. So that's the first part of my exhibit, which I just launched. So part one is photography and poetry. That's what it is. So basically, The Home We Seek, the exhibit, it's a series of pieces. So it's 6 parts, a series of pieces that whose goal is to redefine the meaning of home as a place of movement and inner dialogue. Because people say, oh, my house is my home, but I'm an immigrant. I moved to Canada from France. And even though I have my house, I have my home, I feel at home where I am, I don't think I'll ever move. As an immigrant, you're always in a state of flux. You're moving all the time, whether it's in your mind, movement, you like traveling, and sometimes you travel somewhere and you say, I found my home. This is where I am, even though it's on a trip. I went to Syria, for example, before the Civil War, a year or so before the Civil War. And I'm like, this feels like my home. That's where I would, but obviously this won't happen. I went to Hawaii several times. It feels like home. So what feels like home one day may not feel like home, or may remain a potential home or one of your homes. So it's this constant state of flux that we are in as human beings. One day we say one thing, but saying, I'll never change my mind about anything, my home or the way I feel, how comfortable I feel, and so on and so forth. Things change all the time. So that's really what the exhibit is all about. So part one is photography, poetry. Part two is a type of digital images that I created called the reminigrams. Then you have fractals, then you have photography, watercolors, and then just words. So that's basically what the exhibit is about. And that's it.
I love that. I love that you've embraced so much just growth in your work too, right? You allow, no matter whether it's writing or something else, you allow for so much growth and change in your work, and I think that that's awesome.
Yeah, I want to walk the talk because I want to show to all the creatives, artists, writers that if you put your mind to something, you can actually do it. And you shouldn't be ashamed or self-conscious or just say, oh, I cannot do it. It's too hard. If you decide you can do something, you should do it. If in your heart it feels great, it feels okay, imposter syndrome has nothing on you if you work that way. You say, screw you, I'll do it anyway. And if people criticize, let them criticize because they're not doing what you're doing. You're doing the work. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Let others hate. Others will love it because you will inspire them, you will encourage them. So that's also what I want to do as an artist. Encourage others, show them that they can do it if they really want to. And they should be happy and feel very confident in a healthy way, very proud in a healthy way of what they're doing.
I love that message. And so for people who want to find out more about you, where's the best place to find you on social media or online?
So the best way to find me is really to go to my website, creativeramblings.com, and from there they'll find everything that I do. And in the contact page, they will find my socials as well, so they can follow me from there. But really go to my website. My blog, I post something every single day of the week. So if you want to see my work, see what I do and what inspires me, because it's not just about my work, it's my inspirations as well, go to my blog, subscribe to the blog, and that's it. Start from my website.
Perfect. I've enjoyed my time with you so much today, Cendrine. Thank you so much for being on the show and just sharing part of your day with me. I feel like I really connect with your mission and your message, and I hope that others do too. To everyone so sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to thank you very much for your time. It was fun, and I really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. And to everyone watching, make sure you go check out Cendrine, whether it's her poetry, her fiction, her nonfiction, her essays, her short stories. She does it all. There's something for everyone, and her work will grow with you. What's better than that? Well, that's about it for today. Until next time, take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.